In the summer of 1989, Joseph Wade and Jennifer Florida were supposed to begin the rest of their lives together. They had only been married for 6 days when they left Texas in a rented blue Chevrolet and started driving west toward the California coast. Friends later said they looked happy in the wedding photos. Young, hopeful, the kind of couple that laughed easily together. But almost everyone who knew them also remembered the stress. Money had become a problem before the wedding even happened. Joseph worked long construction hours outside Houston, but jobs had slowed down that year. Jennifer waitressed at a small diner near Pasadena, Texas, trying to help cover bills while planning the ceremony at the same time. Some weeks they barely had enough for groceries. Still, Jennifer wanted the honeymoon badly. She told her sister she had never seen the ocean before. That mattered to her. So they packed cheap clothes into borrowed suitcases, rented a car they could barely afford, and left Texas believing things would finally get better. For the first few days, the trip looked normal. Jennifer carried a small disposable camera almost everywhere. She took pictures of beaches, seafood stands, gas stations, old motel signs, and Joseph smiling beside the Pacific Ocean. On the back of several printed photos later recovered by investigators, she wrote tiny notes in blue ink. First sunset together. Joseph finally relaxed today. Best day of my life. But hidden between those happy moments, something else slowly began to appear. During the trip, Joseph started disappearing at night. Not for long, usually 15 or 20 minutes, sometimes more. Jennifer first joked about it in her notes. Another mystery phone call. But later entries sounded different. He won't tell me who keeps calling. I think he's stressed about money. Then finally, he got angry tonight. By the time they reached Monterey, California, witnesses began noticing the tension between them. The beachside motel they checked into was small and aging, sitting just off the highway overlooking the rocky coastline. The owner later described the couple as polite but distracted. Jennifer smiled often. Joseph did not. Ashley Nicole was working the motel office that week. She was 23 years old and remembered Jennifer immediately because she talked to everyone. She had this nervous energy, Ashley later said, like she was trying really hard to stay cheerful. Ashley also remembered Joseph constantly watching the parking lot. Every time headlights passed outside the motel, he looked up. Every time someone walked near their room, he turned to check. At first, Ashley thought maybe he was simply protective. But after 2 days, his behavior started feeling strange. Other guests noticed it too. One of them was a travel photographer named Marie Aria, who spent most evenings taking sunset photos along the cliffs near the motel. She later told investigators Joseph looked exhausted, distracted, like someone waiting for bad news. Another guest, Anthony Averett, described Joseph differently. Nervous people usually got something to hide, he told police. Anthony was loud, rough around the edges, and often drank near the motel ice machine late at night. He claimed Joseph avoided eye contact with everyone. Then there was Sean Hunter, a local fishing guide who sometimes brought tourists onto his small charter boat near Monterey Bay. Sean remembered Joseph asking unusual questions about isolated beaches and private boat access farther north along the coast. At the time, none of it sounded important. Later, every detail would matter. On the third night at the motel, Ashley Nicole saw Jennifer sitting alone outside the office just after midnight. She was crying quietly while smoking a cigarette. Ashley asked if everything was okay. Jennifer hesitated before answering. Then she said something investigators would never forget. "I think he's hiding something from me." Ashley asked what she meant. Jennifer looked toward the parking lot where Joseph stood beside the rental car, pacing back and forth under a broken light. "I don't know," she whispered, "but something feels wrong." Ashley later admitted Jennifer seemed frightened, not terrified, just deeply unsettled. A few minutes later, Joseph walked over and told Jennifer they needed to go back inside. Witnesses later described the interaction as tense. Jennifer refused at first. Joseph grabbed the car door hard enough to make Ashley jump. Then both of them disappeared into their room. Around 2 a.m., several motel guests reported hearing shouting outside. One witness claimed Jennifer yelled, "Tell me the truth." Another heard Joseph say, "I'm trying to fix this." But no one called police. Arguments between young couples were common enough. The next morning, Joseph and Jennifer were gone. At first, nobody thought much about it. Travelers checked out early all the time, but by afternoon, Ashley realized something strange. Their room was still full of belongings. 2 suitcases sat beside the bed untouched. Jennifer's purse remained near the bathroom sink. Inside were her makeup, wallet, wedding photos, and plane tickets for their return trip to Texas. Nothing looked packed. Nothing looked planned. Yet the rental car was missing. Ashley immediately contacted the motel owner, who entered the room with a spare key. The television was still on. One lamp beside the bed remained lit. A half-eaten cheeseburger sat near the window, already beginning to smell. It looked like the couple planned to come back, but they never did. Police initially believed Joseph and Jennifer may have left after a domestic fight. Officers searched nearby hospitals and highways, assuming the couple would eventually reappear. Then investigators learned something else. Late the previous night, Joseph had been seen near the motel dumpster burning papers. Nobody knew what the papers were. Ashley remembered seeing ashes blowing across the parking lot early that morning. When detectives questioned witnesses, Joseph immediately became the center of attention. He had argued with Jennifer. He acted nervous for days. He lied about where they had gone earlier that week, and according to motel staff, he seemed desperate to leave Monterey suddenly. Jennifer's family quickly grew suspicious, too. Her mother later told investigators Jennifer sounded upset during their final phone call. She said Joseph was acting different, though she never explained exactly what she meant. Then came another strange detail. Phone records showed multiple late-night calls made from motel payphones during the honeymoon. Most lasted less than 2 minutes. Investigators could not identify who Joseph had been calling. When police searched nearby coastal roads, they found nothing. No bodies. No luggage. No signs of robbery. The case slowly began spreading through local news stations across California and Texas. Reporters described the couple as newlyweds who vanished without explanation during their honeymoon. For 3 days there were no answers. Then, just after sunrise, a highway patrol officer spotted the rental car parked near an isolated coastal cliff nearly 40 miles north of Monterey. The driver's side door was slightly open. Inside the vehicle, investigators found blood smeared across the passenger seat. Jennifer's wedding ring was missing. Joseph's ring remained inside the car. And suddenly, what had begun as a missing persons case no longer looked like a disappearance at all. By the end of August 1989, investigators were no longer treating Joseph Wade as a missing husband. They were treating him as a killer. The discovery of blood inside the rental car changed everything. Forensic testing later confirmed the blood belonged to Jennifer, Florida. The amount was small, but to detectives at the time it did not matter. A newlywed couple vanished. Blood was found. The husband was gone. And Joseph Wade had already started looking guilty long before the car was discovered. Police retraced the couple's final days along the California coast, interviewing motel workers, tourists, restaurant servers, and gas station clerks. Again and again, witnesses described Joseph the same way: nervous, angry, distracted. One waitress remembered Jennifer eating alone while Joseph stood outside using a payphone in the rain. Another witness claimed Joseph grabbed Jennifer's arm during an argument at a gas station near Monterey. A motel guest described hearing furniture slam against the wall late at night. Soon, investigators began building a theory that felt painfully simple. Joseph Wade killed his wife during their honeymoon, disposed of her body somewhere along the coast, then disappeared before police could catch him. The story spread fast. Newspapers across California called it the honeymoon mystery. National television stations picked it up within days. One tabloid newspaper printed Joseph's wedding photo beside the words, "Honeymoon Killer?" Jennifer's family watched the coverage in horror. At first, they refused to believe Joseph could hurt her. He had been part of their lives for years. Quiet, hard-working, sometimes moody, but never violent. Then Jennifer's mother revealed something that changed the emotional direction of the case. Just days before disappearing, Jennifer had called her late at night from California. At first, the conversation sounded normal. Jennifer talked about beaches and road trips and how beautiful the ocean looked at sunset. Then her tone changed. She sounded scared, her mother later said. According to her statement, Jennifer quietly told her, "If something happens to me, Joseph knows why." The sentence hit investigators like a confession. Detectives immediately began treating Joseph as the prime suspect publicly. Reporters repeated Jennifer's words over and over on television. The phrase spread nationwide within weeks. If something happens to me, many people, the case already felt solved. But there were still problems. No body had been found. No murder weapon existed. And despite massive searches along the cliffs, forests, and beaches near Monterey, there was no trace of Jennifer Florida anywhere. Still, investigators pushed harder. When police searched financial records back in Texas, they uncovered another disturbing detail. Joseph Wade owed thousands of dollars to private lenders connected to illegal gambling operations outside Houston. Several payments were overdue. One lender later described Joseph as desperate. Detectives believed the motive was becoming clear. Money problems, pressure, a failing marriage, rage. They theorized Joseph snapped during an argument, killed Jennifer, then vanished to escape debt and prosecution. The public believed it almost immediately, but Joseph's behavior kept growing stranger in ways that were difficult to explain completely. Investigators discovered he had withdrawn nearly $1,800 in cash from multiple locations during the honeymoon trip. Most of the money was never recovered. Then motel workers remembered something unsettling. On the night before the disappearance, Joseph had repeatedly entered the motel bathroom carrying wet towels. One housekeeper claimed the sink looked pink afterward, as if someone had washed blood down the drain. Police later recovered a blood-stained towel from inside the abandoned rental car. Joseph's fingerprints were on it. That discovery became one of the strongest pieces of evidence in the entire investigation. To detectives, it looked obvious. Jennifer was bleeding. Joseph cleaned the scene. Then he dumped the body. Even Ashley Nicole, the motel waitress who originally sympathized with Jennifer, slowly began turning against Joseph. When investigators interviewed her again, she described Joseph's emotional behavior the morning they disappeared. He didn't look scared, she said quietly. He looked empty. Ashley told detectives she saw Joseph standing alone outside their motel room shortly before sunrise. According to her statement, he stared toward the highway for several minutes without moving. Then he walked away. The image haunted investigators. A husband whose wife had vanished should have been panicked. Joseph, according to Ashley, looked emotionally detached. And then came the fisherman. His name was Daniel Mercer, a local man who worked early mornings near the cliffs north of Monterey. 3 days after the couple disappeared, Mercer contacted police claiming he saw Joseph Wade standing near the coastal overlook late at night beside the rental car, alone. Mercer described Joseph as dirty and exhausted. He claimed Joseph appeared to be dragging something heavy near the edge of the cliff before driving away. The statement exploded across national media coverage. For many people watching the story unfold, that was the moment Joseph Wade became guilty forever. Jennifer's family stopped defending him publicly soon afterward. Her father called Joseph a coward hiding from what he did. Her younger brother told reporters, "If he's innocent, why did he run?" Investigators asked the same question constantly. Why disappear? Why leave Jennifer's belongings behind? Why abandon the rental car? And most importantly, why was there blood inside the vehicle? But even as the case against Joseph grew stronger, small contradictions quietly began surfacing beneath the surface. The blood found in the car was far less than investigators expected in a violent homicide. The fingerprints on the towel only proved Joseph touched it, which made sense if Jennifer had been injured during an argument or accident. And strangely, none of Jennifer's blood appeared anywhere outside the passenger seat area. No drag marks. No large stains. No signs of cleanup inside the vehicle itself. Some detectives privately questioned whether Jennifer had actually died in the car at all. But emotionally, the case already had momentum. People wanted Joseph to be guilty. The story fit too perfectly. A struggling husband, a frightened wife, a honeymoon argument, a disappearance. Even investigators began emotionally locking themselves into the theory. Friends of Joseph later described him as withdrawn and ashamed long before the honeymoon trip. One former coworker admitted Joseph sometimes disappeared during lunch breaks to take private phone calls. Another claimed Joseph constantly worried about people looking for him. Those details only deepened suspicion. Then, police uncovered another disturbing piece of evidence inside the abandoned rental car. Stuffed beneath the driver's seat was a torn road map marked with circles around isolated forest areas north of Monterey. Several locations were miles away from tourist routes. Investigators immediately believed the markings pointed toward burial sites. Search teams spent days combing through remote wooded areas, digging in soft soil and checking ravines. Nothing was found. Still, public opinion had already hardened. Joseph Wade became one of the most hated missing men in America. Television reenactments portrayed him as violent and unstable. Talk shows speculated about where he buried Jennifer. Newspaper cartoons mocked him as a coward hiding in Mexico under a fake name. Meanwhile, Jennifer's mother stopped sleeping. According to relatives, she spent nights staring at wedding photos, trying to understand how her daughter's honeymoon became a national nightmare. Then, nearly 6 weeks into the investigation, detectives made a discovery that seemed to destroy any remaining doubt about Joseph Wade forever. Hidden inside old motel accounting records was a forgotten receipt from a roadside convenience store less than 2 miles from the motel. The timestamp showed Joseph Wade returning alone shortly after 30:40 a.m., nearly 2 hours after Jennifer was supposedly last seen alive. By early 1990, Joseph Wade was no longer just the prime suspect in Jennifer Florida's disappearance. To millions of people across America, he was already guilty. His face appeared everywhere. Television specials replayed his wedding photos beside dramatic music and dark narration. Tabloids printed headlines calling him the monster husband and the honeymoon killer. One magazine even published an artist's drawing of Joseph standing beside a shallow grave in the forest. There was still no body, no confession, no arrest. But emotionally, most people had already convicted him. Jennifer's family became the loudest voices demanding justice. Her mother appeared on daytime television crying as she held Jennifer's wedding portrait in her hands. She trusted him, she said through tears, and he destroyed her. The interview aired nationwide. After that, public anger exploded even further. Reporters camped outside Joseph Wade's parents' home in Texas almost daily. Neighbors later said strangers drove by shouting "Killer Family" from their car windows. Joseph's father stopped answering the phone after receiving threats late at night. His mother rarely left the house. She looked ashamed all the time, one neighbor remembered, like she blamed herself for something. But even as the country turned against Joseph, the investigation itself was becoming strangely unstable beneath the surface. Detectives continued rebuilding the timeline of the honeymoon trip. The more they looked into Joseph's behavior, the guiltier he seemed. He had lied repeatedly. At first, Joseph claimed the late-night payphone calls were about work opportunities in California, but phone records later showed several calls connected to gambling contacts back in Texas. Then investigators discovered Joseph had hidden the true amount of debt he owed. It was far worse than originally believed. One detective described it as financial collapse. Joseph also lied about where he went the night Jennifer disappeared. He originally told motel staff he stayed inside after their argument, but the convenience store receipt destroyed that claim completely. Suddenly, detectives believed Joseph had spent hours moving Jennifer's body before returning alone to the motel area. The theory felt airtight, and yet small details kept refusing to fit properly. Forensic experts quietly admitted Jennifer's blood inside the rental car was unusually limited for a violent homicide. Detectives argued Joseph may have cleaned the vehicle, but investigators never found strong evidence of a cleanup. No bleach, no chemical residue, no large hidden stains. Nothing. Then there were the tire tracks near the coastal cliff. Police initially assumed the marks belonged to the rental car Joseph abandoned, but later analysis showed the tread patterns did not fully match. The difference was small, easy to ignore, and most investigators did exactly that. Emotionally, they were already committed to Joseph's guilt. Meanwhile, strange things kept happening around the case itself. Anthony Averett, the loud drifter from the motel, suddenly left California after detectives questioned him for nearly 6 hours. He told police he was heading north for temporary work in Oregon. Then he vanished for months. Investigators considered him unreliable but harmless. Anthony had no known connection to Jennifer before the motel encounter, and his fingerprints did not appear in the rental car. Still, Still, some detectives found his sudden disappearance unsettling. Then there was Sean Hunter. The local fishing guide had always seemed nervous during interviews, but over time, his statements became increasingly inconsistent. In one version, Sean claimed he saw Joseph arguing with Jennifer near the parking lot shortly after midnight. Later, he changed the time completely, and he claimed he never clearly saw Jennifer at all. Detectives grew frustrated, but instead of questioning the overall theory, they assumed Sean was simply confused or trying to avoid involvement. By that point, nearly every lead was interpreted through one emotional lens. Joseph Wade was guilty. Even small contradictions became twisted into proof against him. When detectives learned Joseph's bank account remained untouched after his disappearance, many investigators argued it showed planning. They believed he escaped with hidden cash instead. Privately, one younger investigator raised a troubling question during an internal meeting. If he planned all this, he asked, why leave money behind at all? The room reportedly went silent. No one answered him directly. Around the same time, another strange detail emerged from motel employee interviews. Ashley Nicole returned to investigators with an updated memory from the night before Jennifer vanished. At first, she hesitated to share it because she wasn't fully certain. She remembered seeing another man near the parking lot shortly after the argument between Joseph and Jennifer. Not Joseph, someone taller, standing near the edge of the highway beneath a broken streetlight. Ashley said the man seemed to be watching the motel, but investigators barely followed up. Years later, Ashley admitted the detectives appeared annoyed whenever information pointed away from Joseph. They thought the case was already solved, she later said quietly, and maybe they truly believed that, because by the early 1990s, the case had become less about evidence and more about emotional certainty. The public wanted a villain. Joseph Wade fit perfectly. Online rumor forums began appearing as internet culture slowly expanded during the decade. Amateur investigators posted theories claiming Joseph buried Jennifer in the forest north of Monterey. Some claimed he escaped to Mexico. Others insisted he changed his identity entirely. One anonymous post even included hand-drawn maps pointing toward supposed burial sites. Search teams investigated several locations. Nothing was ever found. Still, the rumors never stopped. For Jennifer's family, every passing year became emotionally unbearable. Holidays became reminders. Wedding anniversaries became nightmares. Her mother reportedly kept Jennifer's bedroom untouched for nearly a decade. Meanwhile, Joseph's parents lived under permanent suspicion. Todd, his father, developed severe heart problems during the late 1990s. Friends said the constant pressure destroyed him emotionally. He still insisted Joseph was innocent until the day he died, but very few people believed him. Then, another disturbing problem quietly surfaced inside the investigation itself. Joseph Wade's original debt notebook, the same notebook detectives believed connected him to dangerous lenders, suddenly disappeared from police evidence storage. No one could explain how. The disappearance triggered internal tension within the department, but by then, the case was already cold. Some investigators believed the notebook had simply been misplaced during office transfers. Others suspected something worse. Still, no official inquiry followed, and beneath all the confusion, the timeline itself continued shifting in uncomfortable ways. A tourist from Arizona contacted investigators years later after seeing a television special about the case. She claimed she heard a woman screaming near the Northern Beach access road around the same time Jennifer disappeared. The location was nearly 2 miles away from where police originally focused their search. At first, detectives dismissed the statement as unreliable memory. But there was one problem. The witness accurately described a damaged roadside sign that had not been publicly mentioned in media reports at the time. Suddenly, the possibility emerged that investigators may have searched the wrong area entirely. Yet even then, most detectives refused to let go of Joseph Wade as the center of the case. Emotionally, they had spent too many years chasing him. Admitting uncertainty now would mean admitting the investigation itself may have failed Jennifer from the beginning. Then, in 2007, nearly 18 years after the Honeymoon disappearance shocked America, a cold case investigator named Daniel Reyes reopened old evidence photographs from the Monterey motel. At first, he was looking for something simple, a timeline error, a missed vehicle, anything But while studying one faded crime scene image taken near the motel parking lot, Reyes suddenly noticed something so small that dozens of investigators had overlooked it for nearly 2 decades. And the moment he saw it, the entire case against Joseph Wade began to collapse. In 2007, most people believed the case was already over. Not officially, but emotionally. Jennifer Florida was presumed dead. Joseph Wade was presumed guilty. The public had spent nearly 2 decades repeating the same story until it no longer felt like a theory anymore. It felt like fact. Only one man still believed something was wrong. Retired homicide detective Daniel Reyes had followed the Honeymoon case since the early 1990s. Back then, he worked in a neighboring county and occasionally reviewed evidence during large investigations. He remembered the pressure surrounding the case, the media obsession, the public anger. And he remembered something else too. How quickly everyone decided Joseph Wade was a murderer. Reyes later admitted that even he believed it for years. But after retiring, he began revisiting old cold cases that never fully made sense to him. Jennifer and Joseph's disappearance kept returning to his mind. The missing body, the shifting timeline, the unanswered questions, and most of all, the strange feeling that investigators stopped looking too soon. Though in the fall of 2007, Reyes requested access to old evidence boxes stored in Monterey County archives. Thousands of photographs, motel receipts, witness notes, and crime scene images had been sitting untouched for years. At first, nothing changed. Most of the material looked exactly how he remembered it. Then one afternoon, Reyes opened a folder containing tourist photographs collected from visitors staying near the motel during the week Jennifer disappeared. The pictures had originally been gathered to identify possible witnesses in the background. Most investigators barely studied them. Reyes almost skipped them too, until he noticed one photograph taken near a seafood stand north of Monterey. The image itself looked ordinary. Families eating lunch, cars parked beside the highway, tourists walking toward the beach. But near the corner of the photograph, partially hidden behind another couple, stood a woman wearing a white sweatshirt with faded blue lettering. Jennifer Florida. Reyes froze immediately. The timestamp on the photograph was impossible. According to the original police timeline, Jennifer was already believed dead when the picture was taken. But there she was, alive, standing beside a man who was not Joseph Wade. The image was blurry, but the man appeared taller than Joseph with darker hair and a heavier build. Investigators enhanced the photograph repeatedly over the following weeks. Slowly, facial details began emerging. Then, one detective recognized him. Galvin Jared. The name had appeared in federal investigations during the late 1980s, connected to coastal smuggling operations, moving illegal goods through private marinas along California's northern shoreline. Jared had previous arrests involving stolen cargo, undocumented transport activity, and suspected trafficking routes near Monterey Bay. Suddenly, the Honeymoon case no longer looked simple. If Jennifer was alive hours later than police originally believed, then Joseph Wade's entire timeline collapsed. And if she was standing beside another man, what else had investigators gotten wrong? The discovery quietly reopened the investigation. This time, detectives approached the evidence differently. Instead of trying to prove Joseph guilty, they started asking a more uncomfortable question. What if Joseph and Jennifer were both victims? New forensic testing immediately created more problems for the original theory. Technology had improved dramatically since 1989. Blood evidence from the rental car was re-examined using updated methods unavailable during the first investigation. The results stunned investigators. Jennifer's blood pattern inside the vehicle did not match a violent homicide. Experts now believed the injury likely came from a relatively minor wound to the head or face, possibly accidental, possibly caused during panic or struggle, but almost certainly not fatal. Then forensic analysts revisited the blood-stained towel found in the rental car. For years, investigators believed it proved Joseph cleaned up a murder scene. Now experts reached a very different conclusion. The towel appeared to have been used quickly and emotionally, not methodically. The blood transfer pattern suggested someone pressing the towel against an injury rather than wiping away evidence. The interpretation changed the emotional tone of the entire case. For the first time in nearly 20 years, Joseph Wade stopped looking like a calculating killer, and Jennifer suddenly looked like someone in danger. Around the same time, detectives brought Ashley Nicole back for another interview. By then, Ashley was living quietly outside Sacramento and had avoided discussing the case publicly for years. Friends said the investigation haunted her emotionally long after the motel closed down. At first, she repeated the same story she told police decades earlier. Then she stopped talking. Investigators later described a long silence inside the interview room before Ashley finally whispered, "I didn't tell you everything." Ashley admitted Jennifer approached her privately the night before the disappearance. Not just upset, scared. According to Ashley, Jennifer believed someone had been following them since they arrived in Monterey. Jennifer noticed unfamiliar vehicles near gas stations and motels during the trip north. At first, Joseph dismissed it as paranoia. Then he became frightened too. Ashley claimed Jennifer asked if there was a safe place nearby where they could stay temporarily without using their motel registration. Detectives immediately asked why Ashley never reported this before. Her answer was painfully simple. Because everybody already decided Joseph did it. The statement hit investigators hard. Ashley then revealed another detail she kept hidden for years. The unknown man near the motel parking lot, the figure she briefly mentioned decades earlier, appeared again the same night Jennifer vanished, this time closer, watching the motel from across the road. And according to Ashley, Joseph saw him too. Suddenly, Joseph's strange behavior during the honeymoon began looking completely different. The nervous glances, the late-night arguments, the emotional panic, the desperate phone calls. Investigators soon uncovered another shocking connection. Joseph Wade's hidden debts did not come from ordinary gambling problems alone. Financial records revealed several loans passed through intermediaries tied loosely to smuggling networks operating along the California coast during the late 1980s. One of those names eventually connected back to Galvin Jared. Detectives now believed Joseph may have borrowed money from dangerous people without fully understanding who he was dealing with. Or worse, he did understand, and spent the honeymoon trying to escape them. Then the photographs became even more disturbing. Investigators found Galvin Jared appearing in the background of multiple tourist images taken near Monterey during the exact week Joseph and Jennifer disappeared. In one photo, he stood beside a marina parking lot. In another, his truck appeared near a coastal highway turnout. And then detectives discovered something else. Anthony Averett, the loud drifter from the motel, once worked temporary jobs at a marina, later investigated for smuggling activity tied to Jared's network. Meanwhile, Sean Hunter's fishing routes overlapped almost perfectly with known offshore trafficking drop points from federal records during the late 1980s. The case was changing rapidly now, too rapidly, and for the first time, investigators faced a terrifying possibility. Maybe Joseph and Jennifer were never random victims at all. Maybe someone had been watching them long before they reached Monterey. Then forensic analysts made one final discovery that completely shattered the old investigation. Inside Jennifer's abandoned disposable camera, technicians recovered degraded skin cell DNA from the outer film compartment. The DNA did not belong to Joseph Wade. It matched a man police had never investigated. The DNA recovered from Jennifer Florida's disposable camera belonged to a man named Luis Ortega. For years, the name meant nothing to investigators. He had no violent criminal record, no connection to Jennifer, no known history with Joseph Wade. But when detectives reopened federal shipping records from the late 1980s, Ortega's name appeared beside something far more troubling. He worked as a dock laborer for a small marina company operating along the Monterey coastline during the exact summer Joseph and Jennifer disappeared. That same marina had already been quietly connected to Galvin Jared's smuggling network. Suddenly, the entire case shifted again. Not emotionally this time, factually. Investigators no longer believed Jennifer and Joseph vanished because of a violent marriage. Now they believed the couple may have crossed paths with something dangerous happening along the coast in 1989. And the deeper detectives dug, the darker the story became. Federal records revealed multiple investigations into illegal transport operations using private fishing boats and tourist charters during the late 1980s. Smuggled goods reportedly moved quietly between isolated coves along the California shoreline under the cover of nighttime fishing activity. But according to retired agents interviewed years later, authorities suspected the operations involved more than stolen cargo. There were whispers about undocumented migrants, missing women, cash movement, and corrupt local protection. Most of those investigations collapsed before charges were filed. Evidence disappeared. Witnesses vanished. Reports were quietly buried. Then detectives found Joseph Wade's name hidden inside old financial records tied to one of the intermediary transport companies connected to Galvin Jurad. The discovery explained something investigators never fully understood: Joseph's debt. According to records, Joseph briefly accepted illegal transportation work months before his wedding while struggling financially in Texas. Detectives believed he probably thought it was harmless cargo movement for fast money. But sometime before the honeymoon, Joseph realized the people behind the operation were far more dangerous than he expected. That realization suddenly transformed nearly every suspicious thing Joseph did during the trip. The nervous behavior, the secret phone calls, the constant checking of parking lots, the arguments with Jennifer, the desperate need to leave Monterey early. He was not hiding a murder, he was hiding fear, and Jennifer never fully understood why. Marie Aria became one of the most important witnesses in the entire reopened investigation. For years, she refused interviews, trying to move on from the case emotionally. But after investigators contacted her again in 2008, she finally admitted something she had never told police. The final evening before the disappearance, Marie saw Jennifer walking alone toward the marina, carrying her disposable camera. At first, Mary assumed Jennifer was simply taking sunset pictures. But Jennifer looked distracted, nervous, and according to Marie, a dark-colored truck slowly followed her from a distance. Investigators later reviewed old marina records and discovered one of Galvin Garrett's known vehicles matched the truck description almost perfectly. Detectives now believed Jennifer may have unknowingly photographed illegal activity near the docks that night. Possibly a transfer operation, possibly people, possibly something far worse. Then another devastating discovery emerged from forgotten Sheriff Department archives. During an internal records review, investigators uncovered several missing incident reports from 1989 connected to nighttime activity near the Monterey coastline. The reports described suspicious boat transfers, unidentified vehicles, and complaints from local fishermen. None of the reports were fully investigated. Some had signatures removed. Others disappeared entirely from official filing systems. One retired deputy later admitted there were rumors at the time about certain officers accepting money to ignore specific marina activity. No direct evidence proved corruption, but emotionally, the damage was immediate. If local authorities had protected the smuggling network, then Joseph and Jennifer may never have had a chance. Then came the confession. In March 2009, a man named Hector Salinas contacted investigators from a hospice facility outside San Diego. Salinas had terminal liver cancer and only weeks left to live. At first, detectives doubted his story. Then he described details from the Honeymoon case that had never been released publicly. Salinas admitted he worked around the Monterey Marina network during the late 1980s and occasionally handled offshore transfers connected to Galvin Garrett's operation. According to his confession, Joseph Wade panicked after Jennifer accidentally witnessed activity near the docks. "He took pictures," Salinas whispered during recorded interviews. "That's when everything changed." Salinas claimed Joseph tried desperately to protect Jennifer after realizing who they were dealing with. He repeatedly argued with members of the smuggling group, begging them to leave Jennifer out of it. Instead, both of them became targets. According to Salinas, Joseph and Jennifer attempted to flee during the early morning hours after the motel argument, but they never made it far. Salinas claimed multiple men intercepted them near the coastal highway shortly after Jennifer suffered a minor head injury during a struggle beside the rental car. That explained the blood, the towel, the panic. Not murder, fear. Then came the hardest part of the confession. Salinas admitted Joseph was beaten badly after refusing to cooperate. Jennifer was forced into another vehicle while Joseph was transported separately farther north along the coast. Detectives asked whether Joseph was still alive afterward. Salinas looked away before answering. "For a while," he whispered. Weeks later, investigators searching remote canyon land north of Monterey discovered partial human remains buried near an abandoned coastal trail. Dental records confirmed the remains belonged to Joseph Wade. The announcement shocked the country. For nearly 20 years, America believed Joseph Wade murdered his wife and disappeared. Now, investigators officially confirmed Joseph himself had died in 1989. Jennifer's family struggled emotionally with the revelation. Her mother reportedly collapsed after hearing the news. Friends said she cried for hours, repeating the same sentence over and over. We blamed him. Joseph's surviving relatives experienced something equally devastating: relief, anger, grief, and bitterness toward investigators who spent decades destroying his reputation publicly. Suddenly, old television specials looked horrifying in hindsight. Headlines calling Joseph a monster now felt cruel. His nervous behavior no longer looked violent. It looked human. Frightened young man trying to protect his wife while trapped inside something far beyond his control. Still, investigators had one terrifying question left unanswered. What happened to Jennifer? No confirmed remains linked to her had ever been found. And despite Hector Salinas' confession, detectives still could not fully map the trafficking network operating along the coastline in 1989. Too many records were missing. Too many witnesses disappeared. Too many people stayed silent. Then investigators uncovered something that changed the case once again. Inside a sealed evidence envelope from an old tourist collection, detectives found one final undeveloped photograph that had never been processed correctly during the original investigation. The image was badly damaged, faded, almost impossible to see clearly. But after enhancement, investigators identified a woman standing near a roadside fuel station nearly 70 miles north of Monterey. The photograph was dated 4 days after Jennifer Florida was supposedly killed, and the woman in the picture was Jennifer herself, alive. The final photograph changed everything. For investigators, it proved one terrifying truth immediately. Jennifer Florida survived longer than anyone believed. The damaged image from the roadside fuel station was eventually enhanced by forensic analysts in Sacramento. The woman in the picture wore the same white sweatshirt Jennifer had been seen wearing near Monterey days earlier. Her hair matched, her height matched. And after digital reconstruction, experts concluded the probability of mistaken identity was extremely low. Jennifer was alive 4 days after the honeymoon disappearance, but she did not look free. Detectives noticed another detail hidden near the edge of the photograph. Parked beside the fuel station was a dark pickup truck later connected to Galvin Garrett's trafficking network. That discovery launched the final phase of the investigation. Federal agents reopened old marina records, shipping manifests, and abandoned police files connected to coastal smuggling activity during the late 1980s. This time, investigators were no longer treating the operation like simple illegal transport work. They believed people were moved through the coastline too, quietly, secretly, and Jennifer may have become trapped inside that network after the abduction. Witnesses slowly began talking. Some were older now, tired, sick, emotionally haunted by what they stayed silent about for decades. One former marina mechanic admitted seeing frightened young women transported between isolated coastal properties during nighttime boat operations. Another witness described hearing arguments involving Joseph Wade shortly before the honeymoon disappearance exploded across the news. According to one statement, Joseph begged members of the operation to let Jennifer go. He kept saying she didn't know anything, the witness claimed. For years, investigators believed Joseph's lies proved guilt. Now those same lies looked completely different. He lied about the phone calls because he feared exposing dangerous people connected to his debts. He lied about where he went because he was desperately trying to fix a situation spiraling out of control. He acted nervous because someone really was watching them. And the argument outside the motel, it may have been Joseph trying to convince Jennifer to leave before it was too late. The emotional reversal devastated everyone connected to the case, especially Jennifer's family. For nearly 20 years, they publicly blamed Joseph Wade for her disappearance. Television interviews, newspaper statements, emotional speeches, all aimed at one man who was already dead. Now, the truth forced them to relive everything through a completely different lens. Jennifer's mother agreed to one final televised interview after investigators publicly announced Joseph had been cleared officially. He looked older than before, exhausted, broken in a way cameras could not hide. At one point during the interview, she stopped speaking completely. Tears filled her eyes as she stared down at Jennifer's wedding photo resting in her lap. Then quietly, almost barely above a whisper, she said, "We spent our lives hating the wrong man." The room reportedly fell silent after she said it. Across the country, news organizations began issuing corrections about the Honeymoon case. Old headlines calling Joseph a murderer suddenly became symbols of investigative failure and public obsession. Several true crime television programs aired apology segments, acknowledging how aggressively they portrayed Joseph as guilty before evidence existed. But apologies could not repair what happened to his family. Joseph's mother had died years earlier, still carrying the shame of believing the world saw her son as a killer. His father never lived long enough to hear Joseph officially cleared. Only Joseph's younger sister, Amanda Wade, remained alive to witness the emotional collapse of the old story. When investigators formally apologized to the Wade family during a private meeting in Texas, Amanda reportedly cried throughout most of it. Later she said something detectives never forgot. "You all looked at him like a monster," she whispered. "Nobody looked at him like a scared kid." And maybe that was the hardest truth of all. Joseph Wade was only 26 years old. He was drowning in debt, terrified of dangerous people, and trying to protect his wife while making terrible decisions under pressure. Every suspicious thing he did came from fear, but fear looked exactly like guilt. Meanwhile, arrests slowly followed. Several surviving members of the trafficking network were indicted through a joint federal investigation involving old marina operations and corruption allegations connected to Monterey County during the late 1980s. Alvan Guerrat himself had died years earlier during an unrelated shooting near the Mexican border, but investigators officially named him as a central figure in the network tied to Joseph and Jennifer's disappearance. Anthony Averett was later located living under a different name in Nevada. Investigators believed he helped transport goods for the marina operation during the late 1980s, but lacked evidence proving direct involvement in the abduction itself. John Hunter admitted under questioning that he changed his witness statements because he feared retaliation from people connected to the coastline operation. According to Sean, everyone in the area knew certain docks were dangerous after dark. "You learned not to ask questions," he said. Then Ashley Nicole finally revealed the full reason she stayed silent for so many years. Shortly after Jennifer disappeared in 1989, Ashley received an anonymous phone call late at night. The caller never identified himself, but before hanging up, he said something that terrified her enough to stay silent for nearly 2 decades. "You saw nothing at the motel." Ashley later admitted she spent years convincing herself Jennifer and Joseph were probably already dead. Speaking publicly felt pointless and dangerous. In 2011, investigators returned to the original beachside motel near Monterey for the first time together as a full task force. The building looked smaller now, older, weathered by salt air and time. Most of the original rooms remained unchanged. The parking lot where Jennifer cried still overlooked the highway. The broken light near the roadside had finally been replaced years earlier. Several detectives reportedly stood silently outside room 12 for nearly a minute before entering. Inside, they placed enlarged copies of Jennifer's honeymoon photographs across the bed and table. Smiling pictures from the beginning of the trip filled the small room once again. Jennifer laughing beside the ocean. Joseph standing near the rental car. 2 young people trying to begin a future together. A memorial service was later held along the coastline overlooking Monterey Bay. Both Jennifer and Joseph's families attended quietly together for the first time. Old photographs from the honeymoon trip were displayed near candles facing the ocean. Some people cried openly. Others simply stared at the pictures in silence. Because by the end of the investigation, the tragedy no longer felt like a murder mystery. It felt like something far more human. Fear, assumptions, desperation, and 2 young newlyweds destroyed by forces nobody around them fully understood until it was far too late. For nearly 20 years, the world searched for a killer, never realizing the man they blamed had been trying to save his wife the entire time.